Welcome to the many channels of Kabal. I'm Kabal. Mouthy. Voice, permission, and the long way back to ourselves. Let's take a breath together. Not a performative one. Not the kind that signals a beginning, just a real breath. Because what I want to talk about today doesn't respond well to urgency. It doesn't want to be rushed. It doesn't want to be summarized. Thank you for being here, truly. Thank you for choosing to stay present for a longer conversation in a time when attention is constantly being pulled in every direction. This isn't an announcement. It isn't a reveal. And it isn't a pitch. This is a conversation with my community. And I want to begin by saying this as clearly as I can. Mouthy did not begin as a book. It began as a survival strategy. For most of my life, my voice was something people commented on before they ever commented on me. Not what I said, not what I meant, but how I said it. Too loud, too expressive, too emotional, too present. Sometimes that feedback came wrapped in humor. Sometimes it arrived as concern. Sometimes it was framed as guidance meant to help me succeed. But underneath it, the message was consistent. You would be easier to love if you took up less space. I didn't receive that message once. I received it over time. And that matters. Because repetition teaches the body faster than explanation ever could. I remember one moment very clearly. I was sitting at a table, nothing dramatic, no confrontation, just a group of people talking, laughing, sharing stories. The conversation moved quickly, and I jumped in the way I always did, engaged, alive, present, and someone said my name. Not angry, not loud, not even unkind. They just said my name. I felt my shoulders tighten before I understood why. I remember pulling back slightly, lowering my voice, waiting longer before speaking again. No one told me to do that. I learned it. That's how conditioning works. It doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always arrive as harm. Sometimes it shows up as a correction that feels small enough to ignore, but the body remembers. I learned how to modulate myself, how to read a room faster than I read myself, how to soften truths so they wouldn't disrupt the atmosphere, how to be expressive but not too expressive. And here's the thing I want to be honest about. That skill worked. It kept me safe. It kept me included. It kept me from being rejected too loudly. But it also taught me something dangerous. It taught me that my voice was conditional, that my presence was negotiable, that being myself required calibration. When I say mouthy, I'm not talking about talking back. I'm not talking about provocation for attention. I'm not talking about volume. I'm talking about presence, about the long history many of us have lived with and being told explicitly or quietly that our thoughts, reactions, feelings, and truths need editing before they're allowed to exist. Mouthy is the word that tried to shrink me, so I took it back, not to weaponize it, not to dramatize it, but to let it hold something honest. I didn't sit down one day and decide to write a debut book. I sat down because I was tired of negotiating my own interior life. Tired of carrying sentences in my body that never made it to my mouth. Tired of swallowing moments that deserved language. Tired of feeling like my truest self only existed in private spaces, in notebooks, in late-night thoughts that never crossed the threshold into the world. The earliest pieces of this project weren't poems. They were, well, pressure releases. Fragments, notes, half-thoughts written on days that felt too full to contain everything I was holding. Writing was the only place I didn't have to be likable. And that mattered more than I understood at the time. There's a lie we're taught early on, that being agreeable is the same as being kind, that being quiet is the same as being wise, that being palatable is the same as being worthy. Those things are not the same, and learning the difference didn't come gently. This book doesn't move toward healing like a checklist. It doesn't progress neatly from pain to resolution. It doesn't offer closure in exchange for honesty. It moves the way memory moves, in returns, in interruptions, in moments where anger exists alongside tenderness, in places where humor sits next to grief without canceling it out. That's not a lack of discipline. That's respect for how truth actually works. Growth doesn't happen in straight lines, and neither does voice. Right now, in a moment where so many people are exhausted from explaining themselves, from shrinking to stay safe, from being palatable instead of real, this conversation matters. There was a moment while working on this book where something shifted. Not loudly, not ceremoniously. I was revising a piece I had already softened 3 different times. Each version was cleaner, safer, more explainable, more digestible. And I realized something that stopped me cold. I didn't believe my own words anymore. They were technically fine. They were emotionally neat. But they weren't true. That was the moment I stopped asking, "Will this be understood?" before asking, "Is this honest?" That decision didn't make the work easier. It made it real. That's why this is my debut. Not because it's the first thing I've written, but because it's the first thing I didn't negotiate. This is the first time I trusted my voice without waiting for permission. The first time I let specificity matter more than safety. The first time I chose integrity over ease. That choice cost me comfort, but it gave me something better. It gave me myself. There are pieces in this book that scared me to keep. Not because they were shocking, not because they were extreme, but because they were unprotected. No humor buffer, no intellectual distance, no explanation offered in advance. Those pieces asked me to trust something I hadn't always trusted. My own voice. At some point, I realized the page wasn't enough. Not because it failed, but because something else was asking to exist alongside it. Sound, breath, cadence, the physicality of voice. The EP wasn't created to supplement the book. It was created because some truths don't want to stay still. Some truths want vibration. Some truths want presence. Some truths want to be heard exactly as they were carried. The EP is my way of saying you don't have to sit with this alone. Not instructing, not fixing, just accompanying. I want to be clear about what Mouthy is not. It is not self-help. It is not motivation. It is not a manifesto. There are pieces in this book that scared me to keep. Not because they were shocking, not because they were extreme, but because they were unprotected. No humor buffer, no intellectual distance, no explanation offered in advance. Those pieces asked me to trust something I hadn't always trusted. My own voice. At some point, I realized the page wasn't enough. Not because it failed, but because something else was asking to exist alongside it. Sound, breath, cadence, the physicality of voice. The EP wasn't created to supplement the book. It was created because some truths don't want to stay still. Some truths want vibration. Some truths want presence. Some truths want to be heard exactly as they were carried. The EP is my way of saying you don't have to sit with this alone. Not instructing, not fixing, just accompanying. I want to be clear about what Mouthy is not. It is not self-help. It is not motivation. It is not a manifesto. It was written to be offered. If you read it slowly. If you listen, listen when you need company. If you never touch it at all, that's okay too. Making it changed me. That is the truth. I don't know where this lands for you, but I do know this. If you have ever held something inside because it felt safer than saying it out loud, if you have ever softened yourself to be loved, if you have ever felt the quiet cost of being palatable, then you are already part of this conversation. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be polished. You don't have to be brave all the time. You just have to be honest with yourself. Mouthy exists because I stopped asking permission to exist fully. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with care. Thank you for being part of this community. This has been the many channels of cable. This has been Mouthy, not as a product, as a shared moment of truth. I'm Kabal, and you don't have to be quiet to be worthy. Stay with me.